for joining us today. In this show, we talk about estate planning, legacy planning, putting things in place for your future and making sure that your loved ones and your assets are taken care of. And today, we have an interesting topic we're going to dive into, which is planning for cryptocurrency and digital assets. And this has become a much bigger topic in the last few years than ever before, to the point where, in today's world, I've read a few books and seen this happen a few times, where you can actually decide when you pass away what aspect of your persona you want to live after you, to continue even after you're gone. And, that can be anything from your Facebook profile and LinkedIn profiles to, online banking and online, different businesses that you might run, YouTube businesses, and so on and so forth. So in today's world, everything is becoming more and more digital. And as much as the crypto market has been suffering over the last few months, the blockchain technology is not going anywhere. It's the way of the future. There's many industries that are eventually going to be transitioning into blockchain services. And the reason is because the decentralization that the blockchain provides is a very good way for society to be able to keep track of things in a secure format and to be able to allow the public to take advantage of those services. So, for example, in the past, and even, up until now, when we transfer title on our homes, that transfer of title goes into the county records, and then the county has to manually go back and look, or a title company has to manually go back and look and make sure that your chain of title, in other words, the ownership of who owns that property, that it's clean, that it's entirely easy to follow, right? So one owner to the next owner to the next owner, and that it's transferred without any problems, and that there's no cloud on title. That's the purpose for a blockchain system. If we put transfers of title on blockchain, then it avoids the need for somebody to manually have to go through that process of clearing title, and it's a better record-keeping system. So, of course, if the technology's there, there's a demand for it, and it makes sense to switch it. Eventually, it will be switched. And it's going to happen the same way with other industries as well. Well, when we talk about cryptocurrency and NFTs and other digital assets like that, a lot of times these digital assets have tremendous value. We've seen, Bitcoin is up. Well, it's probably down right now from where it was, but it's up to thousands and thousands of dollars per coin. And in the past, it was at a certain point it was equal to $1. Now it's worth a lot more than $1. And so a lot of these digital assets accumulate tremendous value. And part of the upside to these digital assets is the security that you have around them, where nobody can access it unless they have your private key. But the problem with that system for you operating it and keeping it in your digital wallet and everything, it's a good thing. But for purposes of transferring it in the case of an emergency, in the case of planning your estate, it can be a bad thing, right? Because if nobody can access your cryptocurrency or your digital assets, then what happens to it? And a lot of times it ends up being lost. And you guys have heard those stories. There was a Bitcoin millionaire, maybe even a billionaire, I don't remember, in Australia. He passed away. He left family and business partners, but he did not leave a method for anybody to access his account. And there was, millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin in that account. And so, unfortunately, his loved ones are trying to scramble to, find access to his private key, but he hadn't put it anywhere where it's accessible. So it can't be recovered. And so they go to the company that was hosting his wallet and they say, hey, we need to access this. And they say, well, we don't have a protocol for that, right? So now they're going through the regulatory authorities to try to get access to these accounts. But the reality is that they may or may not be able to. And in those situations, if they can't, then all of that value, all those millions of dollars is basically lost. It will continue to stay in that wallet, but nobody will ever be able to access it. So there are situations where it can become very complicated because your digital assets are essentially lost if there's not a way to access it after you're gone. And it's not as simple as just giving somebody your account and password, because if you do that, there are actually federal laws prohibiting anybody from accessing your online accounts. So somebody using your password, even though you gave it to them, unless they have authorized permission in writing that's compliant with state and federal law, that's a federal felony if they access those accounts. So it can cause dilemmas and problems for somebody to try to get to your digital assets unless you actually set up a plan to give them the right authority to do so. So in today's world, whether it's online banking, whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's NFT collections that you have, or whether it's in the future where we have other accounts, if you want somebody to be able to access it, that needs to be addressed in your overall estate plan. And one of the things that I think is very important is that when we have an emergency that comes up in our lives, we want to have the proper measures in place to make sure that things are taken care of and that there's not going to be a problem, but not at the risk of exposing ourselves to liability or to lack of security during our life. Does that make sense? So if there's an emergency, we want the solution, but we don't want that solution to haunt us in other forms if we don't have an emergency. And that can happen. So for example, if I have a secure key, personal, key that I need for my crypto wallet, and I share that with other individuals, maybe family members or other individuals, or I write it down and I keep it in a safe spot, but maybe that safe spot is, exposed to being burglarized, or maybe that safe spot is something that's, it's maybe, in a spot that somebody else has access to, maybe directly or indirectly, right? That can expose me to security risks. And I don't want that, but it can expose me to security risks. But if I don't have that, then I don't have a solution for, the emergency scenario of what happens if something happens to me. And the only person that knows my secure key is myself, right? So you need to have a way to be able to plan around that as well. And one of the things that we're developing is a software to be able to assist with those sort of things. But there are other softwares that exist where you can store passwords and secure information. And one of the ways to be able to make it even more secure is to put it in a location, or maybe in multiple locations, right? And you create almost like a little scavenger hunt where you say, okay, well, this is the first half of my secure key, and then the second half of my secure key is over here. So somebody who stumbles across it, maybe hacks into that system or whatever, they're not going to actually get your full information. But somebody who knows you and who is authorized as part of your estate plan to be able to access it, they can access the information. So for example, in your trust, you may say, I authorize, my trustee to be able to have access to my crypto wallet, and they'll have access to my secure key. Here are the last 4 digits of my secure key or whatever. The rest of the digits can be found in this account, right? And then you have a secure password account or something like that that keeps track of your accounts and usernames and passwords, and maybe you have the rest of it in there. So that's one example. And that accomplishes both purposes, right? We use a system that actually you can set up notifiers, and those notifiers are only informed of certain information upon proof of your passing or upon proof of an emergency situation, right? And so if you were to pass away and a death certificate is produced, then you get access to certain information because the company knows that that's what you had authorized before anything happened to you. And one thing to be aware of is whatever accounts you use, whether it's online banking or whether it's, you maybe have an online game, there's a lot of different, World of Warcraft games and different games where there's assets that actually have real life value, or whether it's a crypto wallet or whether it's, anything. Every company has their own guidelines on how information is transferred upon your passing. And so you're supposed to comply with every single company's guidelines. Well, it's a lot of things to keep track of, right? And so it's important to make sure that in your legal documents, you've empowered somebody to be able to manage all of them, because otherwise, every single company will have a different answer for what happens when you pass away. It's just like if you have a life insurance policy and you set up a beneficiary designation on the life insurance. Just because you set up your beneficiary designation on your life insurance doesn't mean that you're going to have your 401k beneficiary match, right? And even if you set it up with the same company, right? If you have, let's say, a third-party administrator with Fidelity, and then you have a life insurance that your Fidelity agent helps you to set up, but it's not with Fidelity, right? Or even if it was, it wouldn't have the same beneficiary designation unless you put that beneficiary designation for both. It's the same thing with your digital accounts. So you have to set up a specific process of how things are going to transfer for your Google accounts, for your Apple accounts, for your online banking, for everything has its own method. And the only way to get through that is through the laws that have been set up to allow for your powers of attorney or for your trustees to access these accounts through what we call a digital authorization. It's similar to like a HIPAA authorization, but it's for digital assets. And so that's one of the things that we built into estate plans, especially, we're working with a client of ours that has several $1 million in cryptocurrency. The plan that we're setting up for them is very unique and very specific to those assets. We're doing some tax planning. We're making sure that things are transferred properly. But because it's very specific to the crypto assets and the digital assets that he owns, the plan is going to be, somewhat unique. It's going to address those things specifically. It's going to make sure that we have maybe an authorization on the power of attorney and on his trust to give access to these accounts. And then it's going to specifically identify his crypto wallet, and it's going to say this is how his secure key transfers. This is how things are going to be handled. And as part of the tax planning, we have to get a special valuation for the value of the crypto that he's transferring. And in this situation, we're actually wrapping it into some smart contracts to be able to do some valuation discounting that can be accomplished as well. So there's a lot of really interesting things that go along with planning around digital assets and cryptocurrency. And if you do own cryptocurrency, and especially if you have substantial amounts, we invite you to sit down and to talk specifically about what would make sense for planning for your estate, because we've heard story after story of people who have lost the value in their crypto accounts or in their crypto wallets because they didn't properly plan around it and an unexpected emergency came up, whether that was them passing away, them losing capacity, them losing memory, and then not being able to remember their secure code, and then even though they know it's there, they can't access it and nobody else in the family can. And there's so many situations like that we've heard about that it's definitely worth doing proper planning to avoid it. So with that, we invite you to definitely, if you're listening to this, wherever you get your podcast, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, we do put each of these recordings on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel, follow us. We have other recordings that will be coming out and previous recordings that we've done. And of course, all related to estate planning, legacy planning, asset protection planning, and basically making sure that your loved ones are taken care of for the future. So thanks again for joining us today, and we'll talk to you all next week.